Good afternoon. Our next item of business today is portfolio questions, and our first question is from Daniel Johnson.
Government whether it will provide an update on its progress in implementing the Cycling Action Plan for Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, I gave a full statement to Parliament on the 18th of June 2019, updating progress in implementing the Cycle Action Plan for Scotland. Cycling Scotland are undertaking a review of progress on the Cycling Action Plan 2020, which will be reported on once concluded. At the same time, Cycling Scotland are working with other partners on actions, outcomes and priorities needed beyond 2020, which will play a key part in delivering the greener, safer, happier and healthier Scotland that we all want to see.
Daniel Johnson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The plan in question set out a target of 10% of everyday journeys to be completed by bike by 2020, but the most recent figures show that just 1.5% of journeys are being taken by bike, and only 3% of people travel to work in this way. So can the Cabinet Secretary explain how he will manage an almost seven-fold increase within the next year, or will he furnish Parliament with a revised, more realistic target?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, as I set out in my statement to Parliament back in June, there are areas where we have made progress, but certainly in areas where we have not made sufficient progress, which means that the overall target of the 10% will not be achieved in the timescale that was set out within the action plan, which is why Cycling Scotland are undertaking a review of the action plan to consider what further measures we need to take in order to address these issues going forward. Once we have their review, we will then be in a position to determine what further measures we need to put in place in order to drive this area of policy forward. The member will also be aware that we have, in the last two budgets, doubled our active travel budget to £88 million per annum in order to help to support greater infrastructure investment, particularly in cycling and in walking. And we give a commitment on Tuesday of this week to maintain that going forward in order to ensure that we continue to see infrastructure investment get into cycling and walking provision.
Neil Findlay.
The UK Government are going to extend the cap at which people can take part in the Bike to Work scheme so that they can expand the use of electronic bikes. Is there any way that the Scottish Government can incentivise the uptake of electronic bikes, because the focus just now seems to be more on electronic cars?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Presiding Officer, the member may be interested to know we have a scheme, a loan scheme, where individuals can actually secure funding for the purpose of purchasing electronic bikes, which allows them to look at, because they are more costly, it looks at them being able to do so. I think, if I recall correctly, it's something like £6,000 per household for purchasing up to, I think it's 3 or 4 bikes for each household, and it's an interest-free loan which they receive for the purpose of doing so. So there is a scheme in place that can support people in purchasing electronic bikes. And I know, Presiding Officer, for anyone who's had an opportunity to use an e-bike, they are fantastic in helping to support people in getting back into cycling and being able to use a bike on occasions when they would otherwise choose not to do so. And I would certainly wish to encourage other people to think about e-bikes as an option for commuting.
Question number 2, Willie Coffey.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the work being undertaken by Transport Scotland and the regional transport partnerships in Ayrshire to identify new transport objectives for the region.
Cabinet Secretary.
The draft South West Scotland Transport Study, published on the 27th of June, covers part of East and South Ayrshire and includes a list of potential strategic transport interventions for the region. Once final, these interventions will be subject to more detailed appraisal within the second Strategic Transport Projects Review, which is currently underway. As part of STPR2, an Ayrshire and Arn Regional Transport Working Group has been formed, covering a large area. They met most recently on the 29th of August to discuss the emerging outcomes from the initial evidence gathering and stakeholder events, which were undertaken in May and June of this year.
Willie Coffey.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Can I also welcome the recent news that a new ferry link is to be established directly between the east of Scotland and Europe to the Netherlands, and remind the Cabinet Secretary that in the west of Scotland we still see more than 1 million passengers choosing to fly between Scotland and Dublin. Does the Cabinet Secretary see the potential of developing a direct ferry service to Dublin from our ferry ports in Ayrshire, providing not only a direct connection by ferry for businesses to Europe, but also opening up the huge potential for further tourism expansion between Scotland and Ireland that such a service would offer.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, we would always be keen to see an expansion of the direct ferry connections between Scotland and Europe. However, any ferry connection between Scotland and Europe would be one which would have to be commercially viable. It would have to operate in commercial terms and would have to be operated in a way that complied with state aid rules. The member made reference to the 1 million passengers who choose to travel between Scotland and Ireland by air. A key element of making sure that any ferry service is sustainable is making sure that it has sufficient levels of freight traffic, which are critical to its base load and making it commercially viable. And that's something which any party who is considering establishing a ferry route between Scotland, whether it be between Scotland and Ireland or Scotland and the Netherlands or anywhere else, would have to make sure that it was commercially viable and had a customer base that it could sustain it going forward. But we will always engage with parties who are interested in looking at having direct ferry links with Scotland to other parts of Europe, but it will always be on the basis that it needs to be commercially viable as an operation.
Brian Whittle, to be followed by Colin Smith. Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Could I just say we already have a viable ferry option between Scotland and Ireland out of the busiest port in Scotland, which is Cairnryan. It's being hampered by poor road infrastructure and rail infrastructure in the southwest of Scotland. And given the fact that the investment in the southwest of Scotland is far less than in the rest of Scotland, can I say to the Cabinet Secretary, if he just looked at the 75, 77, 76, 70 and the rail link down there, it would resolve an awful lot of the issues, especially around the need for infrastructure, given the Ayrshire growth deal. I wonder where we are in those considerations.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Presiding Officer, the member will be well aware of the South West Scotland Transport Study, which has looked at a whole range of interventions in terms of improving transport infrastructure in the southwest of Scotland, and that will then feed into the STPR process. We've been consulting on that over the summer months. There was a request for that to be extended, and we've extended it for a further 4 weeks to make sure that as many members of the public and interested stakeholders have an opportunity to feed into that process in order to get it right. I don't accept his characterisation as that we prioritise other parts of Scotland over that of the southwest of Scotland. For example, we have the work that's presently been undertaken to create the Mabel Bypass, which is a very good example of infrastructure investment going into the southwest of Scotland. But it's important to make sure that the decisions that we do make around where our priorities for transport investment should be going forward, whether that be road, rail, bus or any other type of active travel measure, that we go through an evidence-based process to make sure that we make the right type of intervention to support the local area going forward. And that's exactly what the South West of Scotland Transport Study is about, and how that will then feed into the process through the STPR2, which will ensure that we make the right types of interventions to deliver the right type of transport connectivity to all parts of Scotland.
Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Government's programme for government gives a welcome commitment to decarbonise Scotland's passenger rail services by 2035, but the Cabinet Secretary will know that only diesel trains run on rail routes on the ScotRail network in Ayrshire and other parts of south west Scotland, such as Dumfries and Galloway. Does he therefore agree that consideration should be given to full electrification of those routes to deliver the faster, better, more sustainable rail services for passengers in south west Scotland, not least to support those ferry ports in Cairnryan?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, it's important we do take an ambitious approach to decarbonising our rail network, which is why I do welcome the members' comments in relation to the ambitions we've set out in the programme for government in this particular area. However, the member will also be aware that there are significant technological advances taking place in the form of propulsion for trains. So, for example, electrification is the option which we choose primarily at the present time, with almost 70% or over 70% of all daily passenger journeys now taking place on electrified routes in Scotland. And we've also given a commitment to look at further electrification within Scotland. However, there are also advances in battery-powered trains and also in hydrogen trains. And we're already taking forward work with a number of parties to look at how we can explore their use within the Scottish network. So electrification will be part of it, but also different forms of propulsion in the form of hydrogen and battery will also fit that mix in order to make sure that we decarbonise our rail network by 2035.
Number 3, James Jordan.
to ask the Scottish Government how much financial support the UK Government is providing for Scotland's R100 superfast broadband programme.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
All regulatory and legislative powers in telecommunications, including for broadband services, are scheduled as being wholly reserved to UK Parliament under the provisions of the Scotland Act 1998. Despite its reserved responsibilities, at present the UK Government has chosen to commit only £21 million, or just 3.5% of the total investment of £600 million required for the Reaching 100% programme, with the Scottish Government committing the remaining £579 million from our devolved resources, or 96.5% of the total funding required for the programme.
I thank the Minister for that extremely disappointing response. It's a strange way to treat one of the so-called family of nations that we were told we were some time ago. Can the Minister advise how this level of funding compares, though, with investment by the Westminster Government in broadband and fibre in other parts of the UK?
Minister.
I certainly share James Dornan's disappointment with the response, but I think for the reason that we're both disappointed that, well, the UK Government has made the rather substantial sum of £150 million available to help them deliver Northern Ireland's superfast broadband programme, almost 91% of the programme's total cost. Scotland and Wales have largely been left out of the picture, with the R100 programme receiving just 3.5%, as I said in my original answer, of its total cost, and Wales's own superfast broadband aspirations being funded entirely by the Welsh Government and EU funding. So I hope we can have a positive relationship with the new DCMS ministerial team, but I hope they do reflect on the actions of their predecessors and look to increase the support to both Scotland and Wales to deliver our broadband aspirations.
Jamie Green.
Mr Dornan might be pleased to learn, actually, that if you look at the DSSB programme, which delivered 95% of households with broadband, the UK Government contributed £120 million towards that, versus just 60 from his own government, if he wants to look at numbers. But the reality is here that the Scottish Government made a commitment for R100. They didn't have to, but they made the commitment. They promised £600 million, but not a penny of it has been spent yet. They've said it will be delivered by 2021. That's now by the end of 2021. So let me ask the Minister, when will it be delivered? When will contracts be signed? Because that's what people really want to know.
Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I have already made clear to all members in the Chamber that we have outlined a timetable for reaching a decision on awarding the contracts for R100. That is due to happen by the end of this calendar year, and we're in the near future going to be able to select preferred bidders. It is in the middle of our procurement exercise. I've explained this to numerous of Jamie Green's colleagues, that we cannot break embargo on a commercial contract negotiation in a procurement process, which I hope you would understand. We have committed to give information as soon as we are able to do so, and I repeat that commitment today. But what I would say to him, and he refers to the amount of funding that comes from the Scottish Government, I think you'll find, if he goes back and looks at the numbers, if he adds Highlands Islands Enterprise, Scottish Government's support and local authorities funded through Scottish Government, he will see that the Scottish Government has put in more resource than the UK Government has into DSSB. And it's interesting to see a member of the Conservative benches now seemingly taking credit for DSSB when we've been criticised for the last 3 years for so-called failure to deliver. Perhaps now Mr Green will acknowledge the DSSB has been a great success, and in Inverclyde, I know an area close to his heart, 97.4% of premises in Inverclyde have access to super-fast broadband speeds.
Question number 4, Gordon MacDonald.
Scottish Government, what support can be given to the City of Edinburgh Council to manage traffic congestion across the city, especially during periods where visitor numbers dramatically increase?
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government, through Transport Scotland, supports the City of Edinburgh Council by working with the Council and transport providers to promote public transport as a viable option for visitors and local residents. The recently announced significant new funding to improve bus priority infrastructure will also support local authorities to tackle the impact of congestion on bus services. However, the tackling of traffic congestion is the City's responsibility. They have a duty under the Road Scotland Act 1984 to manage local roads and duties under the Road Traffic Regulations Act to secure the convenient and safe movement of traffic through the city.
Gordon MacDonald.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, and I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary supports the ambitious plans that Edinburgh has to tackle congestion, including plans to introduce low emission zone, the city centre transportation project, and plans to extend the existing network of park and ride facilities across the city. But what can the Scottish Government do to support that extension of the network of park and ride facilities like the one at Hermiston in my constituency?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I do recognise that the Council do have very ambitious plans in order to improve the issue of tackling congestion within the city centre, and also to improve public transport infrastructure within the city overall. And some of the funding which is coming through the City deal is assisting that, alongside some of the funding which has been provided recently for Edinburgh for the George Street project through the active travel budget, in order to help to improve transport infrastructure in the city too. What I can say to the member is that park and ride facilities are extremely valuable, and it's important that the city look at how they can develop them going forward. The bus partnership funding, which we announced as part of the programme for government, would be one area that local authorities such as Edinburgh could look at for support in developing bus infrastructure to improve bus journey times and to improve patronage levels. And of course, they could look at how that ties into park and ride facilities. So the over £500 million that we've committed through the bus partnership scheme is one route which the city could use in the years ahead in order to help to support the provision of park and ride facilities alongside bus infrastructure.
Question 5 has been withdrawn. Question 6, Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when Inverness Airport will have a railway station.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the Aberdeen to Inverness Rail Improvement Project is delivering the infrastructure to facilitate a new station at Dalcross, which is being progressed as planned by Network Rail and on behalf of Scottish ministers. We expect the project to be completed on schedule in the first half of Rail Control Period 6, which runs from this year to 2024. Transport Scotland will be in a position to confirm the starting and opening date once Network Rail has completed its feasibility work and third-party funding has been secured.
Edward Mountain.
Thank you, the Cabinet Secretary, for his answer. I just remind the Cabinet Secretary the planning permission is about to lapse because it should have been built already. Now, as the proposed station will be over a mile from the airport, will the price of a train ticket to Dalcross include free travel onto the airport on a shuttle bus?
Cabinet Secretary.
Officer, in relation to his latter point, any matters will have to be considered as part of any proposals brought forward by Hightrans, who are the promoters of this particular project, and how they wish to take that forward. And on his initial point in relation to planning, the reason that the new planning application has been made is not because of it lapsing, but because the railway station will have 2 platforms and a turning loop, which is double the size of what was originally intended, which I'm sure the member will welcome. This is all part of, Presiding Officer, some £330 million which we're investing in rail infrastructure in the north east of Scotland. We've already saw the provision of the new train station at Forres, and I also was able to visit the good progress that's been made with the train infrastructure investment that's been taken forward in the area at Contour, with the new station in an advanced stage and should be open this year. So I'm sure the member will welcome the very fact that we're making such a very significant investment into rail infrastructure within the north east of Scotland, including the train station which the member made reference to, which I've no doubt the people of the north east will very much welcome.
Question number 7, Rachel Hamilton.
Officer, to ask the Scottish Government how it manages increased passenger numbers on public transport during major events.
Cabinet Secretary.
Transport Scotland works closely with public transport providers and relevant stakeholders, helping to ensure that public transport provision for major events reflects anticipated demand and that disruptive impact on business as usual travel are mitigated where possible. This work is reflected in groups which bring together various transport providers operating across a range of modes, including bus, rail, taxi, to discuss these issues and to make sure that they address any challenges identified. Through these groups, partnership working is taken forward in a number of areas in order to look at how they can improve transport provision for major events.
Rachel Hamilton.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. As you will be aware, the widespread disruption on ScotRail on the 24th of August coincided with various major events in Edinburgh. And this also caused chaos to my constituents, and they faced very expensive taxi journeys home because of it. Others were forced to squeeze on just to 2 carriages. And I will quote one rail traveller who said, "The train was dangerously overcrowded and somebody could be seriously injured." I would like to ask you 2 questions. How will the Transport Secretary ensure during major events that proper planning and preparation to anticipate this demand is executed to avoid that overcrowding, because it's clearly not happening now, even with those focus groups? And the second question is, what is the Scottish Government's opinion of whether Haymarket and Waverley should simultaneously remain open during multiple major events, which we've read about in the news today?
Cabinet Secretary.
Sign off. So the member raises a very reasonable point, because what happened on the 24th of August is unacceptable and is a matter which we are considering very seriously. And I've made it very clear to ScotRail and to the other agencies that what happened on the 24th is unacceptable. In relation to the very points which the member made, as she'll be aware, there is a review being undertaken at the present time within the rail industry in order to identify what went wrong and what actions could be taken to prevent the type of difficulties which were experienced on the 24th of August. I will see the details of that particular review once it's been complete, and then to look at what action will be taken in order to implement any recommendations that come from that, in order to look at how we can deal with these issues more effectively. Having said that, I think it's important to recognise that across the board, our transport network, it does plan and manage major events well. For example, the Commonwealth Games is a very good example of where it was managed well. And we have major events that take place across the country at various times, and by and large, they are managed well. However, there's a number of factors relating to the events on the 24th of August that need to be addressed. The member made reference to the issue of 2 stations, whether the Haymarket station should be closed and the possibility of putting all passengers through Waverley. It's quite a common approach that is used within other parts of the UK, that the train station which is closest to the major event is actually closed in order to actually have a queuing system at a train station further away to manage the crowds more readily. However, before we even get to that particular point, there is a wider issue which I believe also needs to be addressed. The wider issue that needs to be addressed is the issue of having a major rugby international match on the same day as the end of the festival, at the same time as Hibs playing at home, at the same time as an English bank holiday where visitor numbers would have been higher in Edinburgh as well. And there is always going to be an element where the system can only manage so much of these things. So there's a wider issue that needs to be addressed about how we make sure that when it comes to managing these major events, we look at the wider issues that have to be addressed as well. And after the review has been carried out by the rail side of things, I want to also look at that wider issue around how these issues are managed in the decision-making process within that. And that Transport Scotland officials have already engaged with Edinburgh Council and other parties on that in order to explore that issue and going forward as well. So it's important we take the matter seriously and we get to the bottom of it, but we also look at the wider issues to make sure we're managing these issues more effectively going forward.
Thank you very much. And that concludes portfolio questions.